for us to persuade human beings of anything, we need to appeal to head, heart, and gut. And the way to start is to start by talking to their heart, get them to care, then get them to trust you, and then persuade them. So give them a reason to care, give them a reason to believe, tell them what they need to know, and then engage everything to tell them what they need to do.
This is Humble Mind. We are a social learning community of people-focused professionals, coaches, mentors, solopreneurs, and a whole lot of other curious individuals who share a passion for connection, conversation, and learning about the future. If you're listening to this podcast or watching it, you're missing out. Humble Mind communities get access to join our podcast recordings live, get access to early releases of new clips and snippets on our platform, our newsletter, access to our group sessions and workshops, courses, and replays from previous sessions. So don't delay. Check out join.humblemind.co today for more. Public speaking is one of those things that either excites you or puts the fear of God into you. Some seem to be able to do it naturally and effortlessly. Others can get better with practice, and others may try and just shun away from it altogether. However, even now, in the age of instant communication and nanosecond attention spans, we still get captivated by great speakers who seem to communicate and almost dance effortlessly with grace and power, precision and passion. Why is that? How do they do that? And what can we learn from other great speakers to make our own presentations, Zoom meetings, a little more interesting and a little more impactful? Well, I'm very happy to say that we've got a living legend with us on the topic. His name is Rich Mulholland. He's the founder of the presentation powerhouse Missing Link. And he's got a pretty impressive background. He started as a rock and roll roadie, but he discovered that the magic of presentations not just lies in the visuals and the effects, but also in the speaker's ability to passionately drive home their message. So he's got over 25 years of experience helping professionals from boardrooms to global stages, and he's helping others mastering the art of engaging presentations. He's also a prolific speaker himself, spoken in over 45 different countries. He's also authored 3 books, including a new one, which will be coming out in the next couple of weeks called Relentless Relevance. We very much look forward to that. And I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks for making time, Rich.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Alex. Always great to chat.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. So maybe just briefly for a couple of people who've maybe not come across your work yet, you're like me, a mongrel. So you're originally Scottish, but you spent a lot of time in South Africa. Now you're back in UK territories. How has that been an interesting kind of, not just a journey, but has that kind of helped your career in a different way? I'm interested to kind of like understand how that's affected your work and and the way that you work with people, your kind of colorful background.
Yeah, so the first thing is, as a speaker or as an expert of any type, not sounding like a local is always an unfair advantage. So anywhere you travel with an accent, people value your opinion higher than people who sound like them. It's a crazy, crazy law,
true.
Right? So the idea that somebody has brought somebody from somewhere must mean that that person is worthwhile. So there's an immediate amplified authority. And, being in Scotland, I don't sound very Scottish. In South Africa, I don't sound very South African. And I'm not even going to attempt Manx. Like, I do not sound like... So I've never been to the place yet where I sound like the people that live there. And that makes me... I use the term exotic sparingly, but somewhat exotic in that regard.
Absolutely.
And of course, there's obviously many more layers to the question you asked, but just straight off the top, there's value there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I called out the rock and roll roadie part because I got that from your bio or your website. I can't exactly remember where, but when I was doing some research, the first time round where you spoke, which was about a year ago, when Humble Mind started kicking off. Tell me a little bit about that. Where did that come from? What band was that? How did you get into that?
Yeah, so the story we're getting into is relatively simple. My dad worked in broadcast sound for years. My sister was a sound engineer. My dad left SABC, and that was the reason we moved to South Africa. And then he got a job with a company called PA Sound. Now, PA Sound, he was the general manager of. They did the Paul Simon tour just before apartheid finished, and there was a bomb actually planted in my dad's office. And it was a crazy heyday time. Bands were just about to start coming back to South Africa. And a band that I grew up really, really loving was called Depeche Mode. I was obsessed with them, and they announced that they were doing their devotional tour in South Africa. And the line, I literally said to my dad, I will lick the stage clean for free. Just get me a gig. And so he took me there. He took me to the stage. He got me a job as a stagehand, which is kind of the lowest of the low. You push boxes, you do whatever you want, whatever you're asked to do. And he said to me, "Do you want to go to sound?" And because my dad and my sister were in sound, and I'd just been at the OMD concert the week before in Standard Bank Arena, and I'd seen their light show, and it just absolutely blew me away. It was unbelievable. Lights, those exact units I went on to specialize in. But I said to him, "No, I'd like to do something different, maybe lighting." And so he introduced me to a guy called Tim Dunn, who became my boss. And that was it. That's where it started. After that, I put my hand up for every single gig that could be done, including the shit ones that none of the other stagehands wanted. And before long, I was offered a full-time job.
Amazing. All I ever wanted, all I ever needed. Amazing.
Yeah, there we go.
That's awesome. So kind of coming into what you do now, which is helping people to present and to speak with clarity and authenticity. What interested you there? Why help people with that specifically?
I mean, the unmessy answer is working in concerts in South Africa. There was no shows in winter, so I started doing a little conference division, and I realized quickly that it didn't matter how much lights and sound and AV a CEO had, introducing their keynote. If they were terrible, they were terrible. So I started a business, literally creating the graphics to go behind them to try and make them more effective. And I did this moonlighting for 6 months before, with a business partner, before actually starting Missing Link. But it was only a couple of years later, the less messy version, or the messier version, is that it was a couple of years of just trying to figure out lots and lots of different things. So we would do that at one side, but we do interactive CD-ROMs and those little interactive business cards and lots of things, until I realized the value of niching. And I looked and I'd read a book called Selling the Invisible by Harry Beckwith. And he spoke about the value of, go to places that others don't want to go. And in our field, the fields of design and interactive and things like this, presentation was really the orphan. It was the one that it was so unsexy. Nobody cared about it. And it was something that I was a bit passionate about. So I remember coming into the office one day and say, "Guys, I don't care what anybody tells you, what you're doing in the company right now, whether you're making videos, whether you're doing interactive work, if anyone asks you what you do, you're a presentation strategist. Just trust me and I'll make it so." And they did, and we did. Yeah.
Yeah, great title. And so, I mean, I was listening to one of the, I think it was a recent episode of Lex Friedman. He was talking on his podcast about the history of ancient Rome. And he spoke a little bit about Cicero, who was this, the kind of the ancient world's orator, I suppose next to Demosthenes from ancient Greece, but Cicero kind of really sort of invested a lot of time in developing and talking about this tradition of oratory, right? Standing in front of a forum in public and kind of using a whole lot of tools and techniques to persuade, essentially, to tell stories, but also to persuade, because a lot of this oratory was used in kind of on, in legal matters where lawyers were maybe less, focused on facts, but they were really about trying to convince a crowd, about who deserves punishment. Did he kill his wife or not? Should he be hanged or not? And kind of, you hear the story of both sides. So and it was really interesting to hear about all the hand gestures that go with it as well, that kind of focus on emotion and these different things. And so like, I'm curious to hear what not maybe your angle, but your interest is maybe on sort of like why this tradition, or why oratory, public speaking, presentation still seems to captivate us even 2,000+ years beyond when we had someone like Cicero, invent or talk about some of these techniques. It still seems to be the order of the day in many, many ways. The same elements of persuasion. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, so I'm pretty obsessed with Cicero myself. His 5 canons: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. They still stand true, right? Invention is the research and data you're doing. The arrangement is structuring things like that. Style, applying your brand and your layer to it. Memorization is what we now have slides for and visual aids for. And then, of course, delivery. Like these things, the frameworks he put in place, his 5 canons, are still the 5 canons, with the exception that very few people need to memorize persuasive communication or presentations or speeches in the same way, because we have visual aids to do that. Yeah. But we just slot in that part there, because the structuring of your narrative and your understanding of how to utilize those visual aids in lieu of memorization that doesn't require putting everything on a screen is still very relevant. And I guess, to tie everything back, relevance is the key here. There's no technology like oration that has remained as unchanged. And I mean, if you go back way further to Plato and Aristotle and rhetoric, these classical premises of rhetoric, they're still utilized in persuasive communication today. Watch Barack Obama's speech a few weeks ago, like, I don't know what it was, like maybe a month ago, dripping with rhetorical tools, right? Anti-metaboles, anaphoras, all of these things. You can just see them. He's a master at it. In fact, my favorite speech of all time is the 2004 Democratic Convention, where he spoke at, just a masterclass. But this is the thing. So we live in a world now today where the ability to communicate, the ability for leaders to speak. Well, first of all, I think that is the difference between a leader and a manager, is your ability to communicate. But in this time now where we're at the last bastion of trust, everything is potentially fake. Right? This video podcast could be fake. Heck, if you look at what Google Notebook's doing now on podcast generation, it blows my mind. And what 11 Labs are doing, everything can be faked. Yeah. But when I get on stage and stand in front of a group of humans, there's this weird thing. First of all, there's the authenticity. People know it's not fake. But it's the one place in the world where you have assumed authority. The moment I get on stage, they've read out my bio, I walk on stage, authority is mine to lose. So I get on stage with this amplified authority or elevated authority. And then the second thing that's relevant in today with short attention spans is people will listen to me for 45 minutes. It's crazy. Outside of long form podcasts where we listen passively while doing other things and check things on our phone and, wandering around or doing things, there's almost nowhere else where you give another human being 45 minutes. So this elevated authority, that's only available in public speaking. So bizarrely, in a world driven by AI and technology, the relevance of rhetoric has gone up, not down.
Is there a tension between sort of useful, valid persuasion and the tactics behind that, and, like you said, being fake or being opportunistic or kind of, being outright, maybe even dishonest, where there's a kind of a balance or there's a line to walk between that? Because it seems easy to take advantage, whether technology is involved anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But that decision in your brain happens long before you decide if you're eloquent or not. Right. So assholes are going to be assholes. If they have eloquence, they may be assholes. They may become con men rather than murderers. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the decision, assholes will always find ways to be assholes. Now, you can, when you unleash the powers of persuasion in any way, you do realize that there is power there. And it does become easy to maybe be somewhat manipulative in situations. But I feel the vast majority of presenters and speakers don't go that way. I mean, you can see them. That's where that authenticity comes in, because that authenticity check is happening by the audience in real time as well. And you know straight away, no matter how eloquent the presenter is, you know straight away when they come across as a bit sleazy and salesy and trying to manipulate you. The sad thing is that the masters in the art of persuasion you will not see and you will not notice. But they're generally doing it, I would hope, for what they believe to be the greater good. Except for politicians.
What, maybe just taking it down to kind of the kinds of people that you often work with, executives, leaders who require at least some kind of decent presentation or public speaking ability in order to effectively lead, to communicate in a better way. What are some of the kind of the common mistakes that you see committed, whether they're intentional or unavoidable? What are the first sort of things that people can kind of start spotting maybe within their own style?
Okay, so mistake number one is people overvalue skill and undervalue structure. That is, you solve for that, and the other two can even, fall away slightly. The second thing is we overvalue our story and undervalue their story. We keep on getting told to tell stories, and people think that means tell your story. And so maybe we can talk about that. And then, of course, in traditional presentation, is we treat the tool behind us like a document as opposed to a visual support mechanism, a visual aid. And this adds to the amount of distraction your audience has. You create a tension between attention for attention, because should they look at the screen or should they be listening to you? And people can't do both. So just those three things as a point of departure for discussion would be where I would start almost anybody on.
And so maybe just going into the first one, because I like it. And as you said it, I would agree. I think often we do overvalue style and not necessarily enough with structure. Like, what are some things that you'd set somebody off on, in being able to help them improve or think differently about structure? Is it about writing it all out? Is it about sort of like understanding how storytelling works? Like, how would you coach someone about structure?
So storytelling is something that exists inside structure. So a well-delivered narrative might have many, many instances of story throughout it. So these little storytelling arcs are in there, and we certainly work on those. But if you extrapolate it out, there is a narrative arc, a narrative structure that we believe makes more sense for humans. For us, it's kind of generally over 4 steps. Step number 1, you want to, we call it an action framework. So you want to give your audience a reason to care. Step number 2, you want to give your audience a reason to believe. Then you want to tell them what they need to know, and then you want to tell them what they need to do. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the only narrative structure that can work, but I would say that if we start thinking about it this way, when your audience is standing in front of you for any purpose, for what you're about to say, you have to work under the assumption that their gas tank is empty, their give a shit tank. What's big in your world isn't big in their world. What we have to do is we have to connect those two worlds together, maybe with something in common. And this is where story could work well. But basically, we have to do 2 things at the beginning of any presentation or talk. We have to open with clarity, this is what we're talking about, and curiosity. And the reason curiosity is so important when it comes to caring is if I stood up and said to you, today I want to talk about purpose, and I want to talk to you about how you can find your why. Well, people have clarity on it, but there's no curiosity because we've heard that drum beaten to death. So we're all like, oh, well, I can tap out now because I know this one, right? It's like a song that you love that you knew all the words for, and then you just kind of got bored of. So, but if I can turn around and get onto stage and say to you, today I want to talk to you about purpose. I want to talk to you about your why. And I want to talk to you about why Simon Sinek's talk was extremely relevant for businesses. It has done more harm than good when it is taken at a personal level, and why personal purpose might be the very, very thing that's holding you back from relevance and maybe actually leading to mental health and depression as well. So now what we've done is we know the clarity on the topic of purpose, but the curiosity, like, who's this guy? Like, it could be starting with a correction response. Like, hey, wait a minute, that's bullshit. Or it could be, okay, let's hear it. But either way, I bought some gas. I bought some give a shit. And provided they somewhat care about this topic, then this curiosity I've added in will make sense. But if they don't care about the original topic, then my job is to make them care about that first. So that's where we want to start with. Then once they do that, so they need to trust either me or my research. So they might trust me by default to the fact that I'm their CEO, or they might trust me because of the bio that was just read. But what I want them to trust me on is for the last year, I've been exploring, going deeper into the topic of personal purpose. I've read countless academic papers on the topic. I've looked at blah, 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 blah. And I discovered something that went so counter to what I thought when I started that it made me rethink the reason I was doing the work in the first place. That's reason to believe. So now and in fact, that little line there about what I went in looking for isn't what I found kind of adds to the feeling that, oh, okay, cool. He didn't go in with an agenda. Then I tell them what they need to know. Then I break it down. We kind of go with Aristotle's rule of three. So generally speaking, sometimes I do more, sometimes less, but generally speaking, I will now say, so I want to explain to you three things that you need to understand about personal purpose. And finally, I want to give you a new model of thought that you can apply to your life that you can take forward. And that is tell them what they need to do. This, by the way, the reason we call it an action framework is because so many of these frameworks are only to do with the delivery of a message. And very, very few of them are to do with the action that happens as a result of the message. And so although it broke the rule of three, give them a reason to care, give them a reason to believe, tell them what they need to know. It's just an unfinished story. And if you consider some of the other ones, that you've probably heard before, like problem, solution, benefit, or opportunity, solution, benefit, or what, so what, and now what, logos, pathos, and ethos, which is worthy of discussion. Those things, they're all about almost the messaging and the reception of the message, but not about the action afterwards. So we need to start with that in mind. So with regards to structure, that's where we want to get everybody when we're working with them. The problem is, if you take somebody who's got high skill, high style, they're used to getting on stage, telling jokes, having people laugh, doing lots of things. Everything's wonderful. Everyone has the best time ever. And then they get off stage and nothing really changes. Now, contrary to popular belief, I kind of put Ken Robinson in that category, or at least his big TED Talk. I thought it was more style than substance.
I agree. Yeah. On a few rewatches, you kind of realize, even though it's so beautifully said, it's like, what are the points again? What did he actually say?
Yeah, and even the points he made, they weren't very persuasive. The first premise, our school's killing creativity. Show me the body. Show me the body. We live in the most creative time in human history. More patents were registered in the last year and a half than in the 100 years before it. Like, creativity is at its peak. And then, of course, some of the little stories he told, they even to the slightest scrutiny, the little kid who wasn't learning ballet at an academic school, so they sent her to an art school. That's what art school's for, right? Generally, schools cannot cater for every whim of every student. They're there to cater for the original premise: reading, writing, and arithmetic. So if anything, schools have become better in terms of unleashing creativity. It's our parents' role in taking management of the creative output of our children that has diminished, and we now want somebody to blame, and we're scapegoating schools. Anyway, that's a deviant rant. That's a rant off topic, but it's an example though of more style than substance when you look at it.
Yeah, R.I.P. So Ken. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, and more power to him.
But I agree, and that's a great example of a speaker who has this fantastic charisma, and you just kind of fall in love with what he's saying because of the style and because of the funny joke, and he was really funny as well.
Yeah, wonderfully funny.
But then the points almost get a little bit more mushy, if anything. Yeah.
And look, he's probably. I'm being maybe a little bit unfair to the guy. Like, it was an effective talk. I'm sure it made a difference. I'm sure it made people think about things in a different way. You can't say that it didn't drive action and behavior change. But I say that to illustrate a point and not to throw your company's sales manager under the bus necessarily, because that's where we see that kind of thing. Stand up, show a bunch of memes, make everybody laugh. Everyone has the best time ever. The person gets off stage. Everyone's high-fiving them, saying how brilliant it was and how entertaining it was. Yeah. They think they're brilliant and nothing changes.
Yeah.
as opposed to the quiet leader who can't speak loud, so everybody has to lean in, but hooks you with such a narrative structure that you end up hanging on to every word. And as a result, you leave as a different human being. No one goes up to that person and says, that was the best thing I've ever seen. But they just change and evolve quietly and forget that he was ever there. But they just are transformed human beings. And that's the job of presentation. The job of a public speaker is slightly different.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a great distinction you've made there. I suppose to take it up a level in a way, it also helps to distinguish this idea that I think that maybe a lot of people have. Perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people kind of think that, you know, if there's a talk I'm going to, or if, you know, the idea of public speaking is there's almost this sort of performative element, you know, almost similar to an actor, where I've got to kind of entertain while I'm speaking, and perhaps some of that's true, but at the same time you are there presumably because of the material, because there's a message that matters to you rather than enjoying the show. Maybe that's debatable. I don't know, but well, I'd imagine there's still there's a service you've got to do to the information first.
Yes. Okay. Now this is going to get us back to maybe what when we talk about story in a second, because I'll talk a little bit about ratios. But so as a professional speaker, I wish I was there to talk about, at the moment, say, being relentlessly relevant and how we can do that, and what's inside my brain and all of these things. But the reason people book me is because somebody said to somebody else, we're looking for a really, really high energy speaker that's going to lift the room up. It's quite a heavy event. We want somebody who will change the energy of the room, who'll do all of these things. Can you recommend anyone? Yeah, there's this crazy Scotsman. His name is Richard Mulholland. He'll do that for you. He speaks about lots of different things like sales and innovation and things like that, but have a call with him. More often than not, I am booked to speak before we have a meeting to discuss my topic. I get that that's not normal, but the downside is I realize that I'm not, necessarily being booked for my mind, but for this intersection point between being entertaining and being interesting. And when I work with professional speakers who are on our speaking course, I explain that to them. I say, it's not enough just to have something smart to say. If you're smart, but you're not adding, most conferences are full of smart people. Actuaries are smart. Sales directors are smart. But we're there to add a different dimension. Yeah. And so we have to elevate that. But of course, when I'm speaking to the CEO, we talk about boredom slaying. And when I'm speaking to a CEO, maybe talking to a group of people around maybe a contentious topic about why some people have lost their jobs or things like this, you can't be boring. Because if you're boring, you'll lose people. You can't be funny and entertaining and humorous necessarily, but you can be interesting. And so we need to find what is that interesting factor. So, and it's not just the content, it's other elements and maybe storytelling and things like that will come into play. So you're absolutely right that it's not always about that. But let me tell you, as a professional speaker, I reckon every belly laugh I get an audience adds $500 to my speaking fee.
Hey, the meat is running.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to linger for a moment on what you said about kind of boring and being interesting. Is there a kind of a little method or recipe that's worth thinking about if someone, let's say, is not a natural speaker, but like you said, they're an actuary or they're a sales director, they're smart and they've got a message to say, but they've got to kind of dial up the sort of the entertainment factor, in some way. But at the same time, you also can't necessarily ask them to be somebody else, right? Because that's always going to be bad advice. So how can someone kind of tap into that sort of presentation level version of themselves, whether they're speaking publicly, whether they're online, maybe they're just, hosting a board meeting, but still kind of in keeping with kind of who they are, so that, because I think previously you've said we've all got an internal bullshit detector. We all know when someone is either lying or trying too hard, or so. How can you coach someone to sort of like bring out that version 2 of themselves?
So yeah, the first thing we have to do is to change their context. Often people think, well, I would behave one way, but on a presentation, so we might be chatting like this, and then I'll walk onto stage and it'll be, Hello there. Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Richard Mulholland, and today I'm here to talk to you because I was coaching a lady yesterday, and when she stood up to do her first run through, she acted like a person doing a presentation. So she went from, "Hey, thanks so much for coming in. This is amazing. Okay, can I take you through it? Hello, everybody. My name is," and I was like, no, just go back to, first of all, I want the other one. And the mindset, if I want to try to put you in a mindset, I want you to imagine, do me a favor, Alex, when's the last time you guys had a dinner party or something like that? Can you remember? We had a bunch of friends over.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, you're in, picture the setting where you're at. And then at some point that night, you were telling a story. And it might have been a fun story. It might have been about a friend or an event that happened or something like this. And for a brief moment, you're holding court and you're loving it. And you're telling the story and you're delivering this message to everybody. And everyone's kind of looking back at you, smiling. And there's a certain energy that you're bringing to tell that story to everyone. In fact, no matter who you are, you lean into this type of, and maybe, like me, it's big and over the top storytelling, but, maybe an accountant might be a bit more subtle in things. But the way they tell the story is more thoughtful. Yeah. But in the end, everyone's just having the best time. That's who you want to be. You want to be dinner party you. Right? You want to get to the version of yourself that you are when you're speaking to people that you trust, and you let your guard down slightly and you bring them in. That feeling, if you can remember that feeling, and I actually have a visualization on YouTube. It's like getrich.af/meditation, I think, or missinglink.wtf/meditation, one of those two. But the whole idea is to get people into the mindset of being that type of speaker. So that's the first thing is to remember how it feels. And so most people, they're trying to act like a character that they don't remember, as opposed to acting like a version of themselves that they do. So the first thing I want to do is to connect you with that version of yourself, that dinner party holding court version of yourself. Then you said earlier, you can't ask the speaker to change. Well, you can't ask the audience to change either. And so the next bit of advice is to tell people, okay, it's not enough to be intellectual. In order to make a change in humans, in Here Be Dragons, I wrote about the robot on the back of the elephant, which is a kind of play on Jonathan Haidt's Rider on the Elephant. And his basic argument, the reason I like Robot on the Elephant, is I kept on picturing myself on the elephant. Whereas imagine C-3PO on the back of Dumbo. And C-3PO is saying, we should go left. We should go left. And Dumbo's like, but there's donuts on the right. Like nobody would bet that they weren't eating donuts. Nobody. And the logic part of our brain is C-3PO, and Dumbo represents everything else. And if you imagine that your brain is constantly this battle between C-3PO and Dumbo, if you're trying to persuade somebody of anything, stop speaking to 3PO and start speaking to the big elephant with wings. Right? So that's the place where we have to get to. So it's an emotional thing.
Yes.
And most intellectual speakers, they try to intellectualize their audience with data, with numbers, with things, but numbers have very little emotional connection. And again, it sounds like such a cliche, but that's where story comes into play, where narratives can actually draw people in. So what I like to do is I like to start with the story and then get to it. Yeah. And if I can just maybe go deep on this for 1 second. Yeah. I mentioned this earlier, but logos, pathos, ethos, this Aristotle's kind of trifecta that he speaks about. Forget the words, the Greek, and just remember head, heart, and gut. In order to persuade an audience of anything, you have to appeal to all three. Okay, so head, logos, pathos, heart, and ethos, gut. And the way to think about this is, imagine I said there was somebody speaking about a topic that you really, really care about, but you trust them, but they don't give you any actions to do afterwards. You care about the topic, but they don't give you any information. That's like often motivational speakers. Like, you're very, very nice. I care about the topic. You connected to me emotionally. I trust you, but there's no real information. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? I just feel nice for a little while. Yeah. If you had somebody else that maybe you trust them, and they give you lots of information, but they don't connect with you, that might they just bore you and you kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody who you care about the topic and they're talking about information, but you don't trust them, well, that's the other party's politician, right? So that's where that exists. So for us to persuade human beings of anything, we need to appeal to head, heart, and gut. And the way to start is to start by talking to their heart, get them to care, then get them to trust you, and then persuade them. So give them a reason to care, give them a reason to believe, tell them what they need to know, and then engage everything to tell them what they need to do.
That's brilliant. That's such a useful and intuitive way of not just thinking about speaking, but really kind of any sort of messaging, any kind of storytelling, whether, and that goes beautifully also into sales as well. Because I mean, there's so much that's connected there with what we do, in communication compared with what we do with sales, how we sell, how we persuade, how we're able to solve a problem in the life of a customer and tell them the story about where this ends up, ultimately with you being able to buy something from me. So that it's such a useful way of sort of structuring that together.
Yeah. That's why we refer to at Missing Link, we talk about persuasive communication more than just presentation, because there's persuasive communication is what it's about. How do I become more persuasive when I get on stage? And some people, again, to go back to your question about being nefarious, if you're, but being persuasive is being nefarious. Well, if you're not trying to convince somebody of something, what are you doing on the stage? Right. Like, why are you wasting their time? We should be trying to offer people information to change, hopefully, their future actions. I want to persuade you that, whatever I think about climate change, or I want to persuade you about whatever I think about veganism, or I want to persuade you on whatever I think about, buying something from our business. But either which way is we are all trying to be persuasive communicators. We're trying to win over minds to our side of the argument.
Mm. Is there, just going back to something else you mentioned, I think you mentioned the word clarity
clarity and curiosity.
Yeah, clarity and curiosity, that's it. But just on clarity, like for me, I absolutely value and love listening to speakers who are just beautifully clear, not a word out of place. I can also appreciate that in great writing as well. But sometimes I think in my own style, my pursuit of clarity kind of, it gets a bit muddled up by, other things that I want to say at the same time, and they end up being not as clear as I'd like to be. Is there any sort of advice on kind of helping someone to be clearer when they speak, or clearer in making their point, rather, should I say?
Yeah, be more Hemingway than Peterson, right? So
good.
Jordan Peterson says very simple ideas, and some of his ideas maybe not so simple, but simple concepts in profound sounding ways, as opposed to profound concepts in simple sounding ways. If you have to be overly erudite in order to be eloquent, you need to work on your messaging better. So start with the most simple way, speak to the everyman, speak to the person so that everybody would understand. And then, work up from there. You certainly should not be trying to win intellectual points with your language and with the words that you use. And in fact, it's the same thing with rhetoric. You'll see some speeches where I maybe pasted on a bit thick, and I'm really throwing around anti-metaboles. It's not the size of the dog in the fight; it's the size of the fight in the dog. Those kind of things, and I write them. And it's not about this. It's not about that. It's not about this. And you throw these tools and devices out, and they look like overly pasted on makeup or photographic filters. Yeah. What you want to do is to weave them in. So, like I think it's isocolon is the one where. Sometimes half of learning rhetoric is learning another language, but where the pentameter of phrases rhymes, but the words don't rhyme. So it still feels delicious to your brain, but it seems so subtle. Those kind of things are wonderful. And so that would be the first thing, is just to not try to be too erudite. Eloquence should be more about saying smart things in simple ways and simple things in smart ways.
Yeah.
That's an anti-metabole.
Yeah. Proves the point beautifully.
Yeah.
something else that I remember, one of the first things that I picked up from you when I first discovered you, I think it was one of your videos on YouTube, and you were talking about the distraction, and sort of maintaining attention. And I always love that idea, because especially I think in the world of online presentations, when we're listening to Zoom calls and we're on long meetings and so on, we're inevitably going to be distracted. We're going to lose the focus, no matter how charismatic or clear the speaker is going to be. There's going to be moments when I'm going to check my email, or when I'm going to just not be listening for a few seconds. And so how can a decent speaker or presenter sort of, maybe you can talk about that kind of tension between distraction and attention, and how to think about it, and how to maybe not fret about, if your audience kind of glazes over for a couple of seconds, bring them back in the room. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So that was the first realization for me when I started presenting online. Something changed. And it took me a while to understand what it was. But what it was with a regular in-person audience, my job was to hold their attention. So there's points where they're often not distracted by something else, but people go into submarine mode. So their bodies are still there, but they're thinking about something else. They're doing the dishes or the washing or things like this, in their head. So I want to try to hold their attention for as long as possible. And the way that I do that is I make changes in my talk and in structures and the way I do things, and my pace and my pitch and my slides, to try and win them back. Now, I have to do the same things, but what I realized with an online audience is, instead of holding their attention, what I needed to do was interrupt their distraction. So the second you lose somebody's attention online, they don't start thinking about something different. They start doing something different. Okay, so this is a very, very different place, because you could be thinking about something different, and I just change the slide, boom, and you're right back in the room. You're like, oh, okay, what's this? There's a pattern interrupt. I've got to look at it. We call these typewriter moments. In the old days of old-fashioned typewriters, you type, and then but the carriage would get to the end. If you kept typing, the paper, the audience would still be there. You'd still be typing, saying things, but nothing would change. So you have to go like, whang, bring it back again, and then you can type and the audience can receive it. The problem in the online audience is that the online audience is gone. So I could be changing my visuals and they wouldn't notice it. So what I have to do is I've got to call to them in a subtle way. So I might say something like, so I'm about to show you a slide, and this next slide is going to illustrate something to you in such a way that I think it will reframe what you think about it. Now, it's an important slide, and I want you to look at it. I want you to examine it. So then, like, oh, well, shit, I better alt tab and come back for this.
Yeah.
Or I'll say something like, as this next slide shows, or let's all look at this together. Or I'll use polls or chats. And guys, I want to have a poll. I want everybody to answer a question for me. And I can see that, by the way, if I'm on a facilitation or a talk and I put up a poll for an audience, and I'll say, can everybody please fill out this poll? And it's relatively quick. And it says there are 60 people in the room, but only 40 people fill out the poll. Well, then, it's a sure sign that somebody's gone to the toilet or they're checking their email. And so you try and win them back. So it's a very, very different tension that you're managing. But the basic fundamental rule of have enough changes in your pace, your pitch, your pause, your tone, your visuals to be visually and audibly interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, because we're kind of constantly, we're almost used to the level of distraction and interruption, where you should see, I've got more tabs open than someone at a bar, but it's kind of just normal for me at that distraction. And I think what my brain tells itself, whether or not this is ridiculous, is that I can still listen to you while doing an email, while doing that, and so it's just interesting to think about with that technique from an audience member's perspective, because I think you're right. There is a distraction, but I'm still in the room. The distraction is not like it's not like it's difficult to get back onto the boat. It takes me half a second, and I'm probably still, following 90% of the information.
Yes.
So it's just interesting to hear what you're saying, but just from someone who might be, one of those 50 or 60 people in the room, where I'm online and I can certainly, fake it where I look like I'm paying attention, pseudo productivity, as Cal Newport likes to say. But, kind of like, that sort of difference between really being distracted and showing that I'm not distracted.
Just on the flip side of this, and I don't want to put this on the audience, but as an audience member, when I am audience, if you want to get huge value out of something, if you attend an online presentation, train yourself, test yourself with paying attention. I often say to audiences, hey, your attendance isn't required. Your attention is. Like, if you're here, be here. If you're not here, nobody gives a shit. I didn't know you existed before 10 minutes ago. But if you're going to be here, don't just show up, turn off your camera, and check your email. What's the point? Like, we can mark you off in the attendance register and rather just leave and go do what you want. So, but if I'm watching something, there's often times where I'm watching, and then I'm like, well, let me just quickly check my mail. And when I catch myself doing it, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Go back. And so the way that I try to do that is by making active notes. So I want to be doing something. Sitting as an audience member when there's so much distraction available is difficult. So what I do is I sit down and I try to listen to what a speaker is saying. And instead of just making notes of what they say, although occasionally I do, I try to create actions from what I've just learned.
Right.
So learn how to use an antimetaboly. Write an antimetaboly of my own. What's an isocolon? When do I, whatever, read about Cicero. And so that forces me to become an actively engaged participant where I measure myself on the amount of actions that I've set up at the end of communication. So I just think that it's quite hard to present online, and not everybody who's presenting online is necessarily well trained at it. But if you're showing up, force yourself to show up. The audience is a part of the mix.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, great. Yeah. I want to ask you briefly about the role of an interviewer. So obviously that's me in this situation and what we do on the podcast. But I find that a lot of the work that I'm doing, a lot of the work that a lot of people are kind of doing, they might not necessarily be speakers or trained as a speaker, but they often are in a position where they need to sort of facilitate a session and they need to ask questions and kind of get things going, and in a sense play the role of an interviewer. Do you have any kind of notes on how to be a good interviewer, on are there any tweaks to the tools that we've talked about when it comes to doing that? Because in a sense that obviously the biggest change there is that it's not a monologue anymore. There's more of a direct kind of back and forth. There's a dialogue going on with at least another person. Are there kind of changes to how to kind of, still hold the room, make sure that your message is clear? Any kind of thoughts on good interviews? Yeah,
we actually run masterclasses on this more for panel discussions, right. Because those are terrible things. Panel discussions are like interviews in front of people, but it's painful they're potentially brilliant, but more often than not painful, because you're just sitting watching a group of people have a conversation.
Wait for their turn. Yeah.
Yeah, wait for their turn, and it feels very, very iffy, and you don't really know. And I've been on panels before where I thought there's nothing that I feel like I can add because I've not set anything up.
Right.
So the first thing we say in those examples is give people a chance to almost state their case. So up front, like one question could be at the beginning of a podcast. If at the end of this podcast, you wanted the audience to walk away with evolved in some way around one topic that they maybe don't even know that they care about, what would that be? And where would that look like? And then the second question might be why. So now what we've done is you've got into the state of what I give a shit about at the moment and what I'm thinking about doing, and then we can get into that from there. So you can set an audience up that way. Obviously, you and I had a chat beforehand, so we knew where we were going, so that was very easy. You also came on very well prepared. Your opening monologue was wonderful, and it did a lot of work for setting the premise for me even. I was able to mentally get into the place. Right, and in fact, sometimes people show up, hey, today's speaker is the founder of Missing Link. He's done such and such and such and such. I'm really excited to have him, Rich. Hey, do you know where are we going? So when we start, we basically start from zero. And it's straight into long form origin story, into these things. And it's kind of tricky because the opening questions dictate where we're going with something if they're only building from that. But if their opening question isn't brilliant, then. And so in this case, it was very relevant and I knew where we were going. But often I'll say to people when I'm on a podcast, hey, please don't ask me the first question being, how did you get started? Because that's where every interview starts. And by the end of this, it gets to the same place. So there's only so many places that it will naturally go from there. And also, if my audience is listening, they'll think, oh, I've heard this song before.
Yeah.
And they'll move on. Whereas here we took it that way. So I think there's a lot to it. I think there's also managing. There was an era with Tim Ferriss where he started acting more like the guest and less like the interviewer. But then I've seen other people where they go the other way. And balancing, and I think you do it wonderfully well, but balancing the act of conversation is like, so each of your questions isn't just a sentence with a question mark. It's a little bit of a thought process. It's a segue into something you were thinking about in the gap. And so I think that's wonderful.
Cheers. Thank you. Yeah, it's something I'm really conscious of, actually, because I always find when I listen to podcasts, I mentioned Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan. There's no accounting for taste if anyone likes him or not doesn't, but he is an amazing conversationalist as well. You know, the ability to sort of often not really even ask questions, but sort of state a view of some kind, put a talking point on the table and kind of like, what do you think? You know, instead of like crafting a really, smart, precise question, it's more sort of like, kind of, passing the ball back and forth, which I find as a listener, as a passive audience, that's really quite interesting to listen to and to watch, because you're kind of drawn in a really good way without it feeling like it's a Q&A, which no one likes listening to.
Well, it feels like a conversation.
Yeah,
exactly. He's charismatic and eloquent, and whether you like him or not is almost irrelevant.
Yeah,
because you generally, most people go to it. Well, there are super fans who go for Joe, but I will occasionally see Joe Rogan stuff come up, and I click on it not because it's Joe Rogan, but because the guest is interesting to me, and I think you'll get a unique perspective from them. And so I can enjoy the exploration into the mind of the guest with his style because it's charismatic and eloquent. And it's hard to make the case that he's not. Like, some people try and make him like he's just like a bro, but he says things in cool ways that gets good stuff out of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
But I've never watched the full episode yet.
Yeah, I think it's better to watch while you're doing or listen while you're doing the dishes or driving. I think it goes down a little easier. I want to talk briefly about your book, but mainly also just the idea behind it, Relentless Relevance, that's coming out in a couple of months, couple of weeks. When will that be out?
Well, so it's coming out on the 15th of October, which is the day before my 50th birthday, which is the day from my first book, and which is kind of the reason that I've become quite obsessed with relevance of late. It's like a bit of an existential crisis, right? It's about my own personal relevance. Like, fuck, you're old, bro. Like, what's going on? And trying to struggle with my relevance, the relevance of my company in a world disrupted by AI, why we built another business to compete with our first business. We've kind of gone red team on our own business it's an exploration into why I think and I truly believe the question of being relevant has to be at the core. Like, we have to be asking, what makes us relevant? And relevance for me is the state of being appropriate to the matter at hand. How appropriate am I to the matter at hand, where the matter at hand might be the zeitgeist of the world, it might be a conversation that you're having, it might be a context in which you're speaking, it could be any number of things. But the first question is, I always say that the best flow thing of any speaker, if you can get to the point that says, this begs the question, this begs the question, this begs the question. Yeah. You should be begging lots of questions. But this begs the question is, what is the matter at hand? And we need to be obsessing over that more now than I think ever before.
So I want to ask a sort of a qualification here. Are you looking at this in terms of how can I, as a speaker, as a human, whoever I am, how can I be more relevant, or how can the message I want to say or my contribution to a topic be relevant? Well, because there seems to be a distinction there.
Yes. And I think the two go hand in hand.
Okay.
Right. So let's talk about messaging just specifically. Okay. So if I'm on LinkedIn and I talk about purpose, or let's do another one because we've done purpose. Let's do empathy. Okay. And
which I know you're an enemy of.
Yeah. So like I understand empathy, but again, and here's the thing. So a lot of people think that I'm contrarian. I don't think I'm contrarian by default. Here's how I try to be relevant. 90% of the things that I read, because of the sources I curate, I'm like, that's interesting. I agree with them. Like my favorite podcast is David Eagleman's podcast, and he speaks about the human mind and the brain. It's absolutely wonderful. If you haven't listened to it yet, it's just every episode is a gift. And so I listened to this thing, and I agree with pretty much everything the guy says. In fact, most of it informs me because I didn't even know about it beforehand. Like, did you know that we communicate at 39 bits per second, which is hilariously inefficient?
Wow.
Like hilariously inefficient. Like you can type at 100 bits. It's bizarre. But so most I agree with. So I don't bother communicating and talking about those things. I only every now and then I'll find a ripple and be like, wait a minute. I just question everything on my arm. So I get to one, I'm like, hold on a second, that doesn't sound good. So a friend of mine has a podcast, and he was talking about Joe Dispenza, and Joe Dispenza talked about how he uses his pineal gland to have telephone calls with people from other planes and existences. And like that, there's a red flag. Like I need more than that. And to say, trust me, it's science is not enough. Like, so I find a point, and then I might say, okay, is this an area, part of my area of authority, or do I have a meaningful, well thought out thought process on this? And can I present it? Now, my relevance comes from having unique opinions on topics that people care about. If I have the same opinions on topics that people care about, what I'll get is maybe social reinforcement. The like button. The like button basically is LinkedIn for, hey, you think what I think. High five.
Yeah.
The heart button is, oh my God, you really think what I think. High five. The only button worthwhile, there's two buttons worthwhile in the congratulations button is like, oh, well, you whatever. It's uninteresting, but it's at least something. The only two that are actually interesting is the humor one, which possibly mostly in the congratulations is functional of the way you said it. But that light bulb one, you made me think about something. You switched on something different. And so that's what I want to get. My ratio is I'm not in the business of likes, I'm in the business of light bulbs. And my relevance is dependent on how many of those I can get, which is shockingly not enough. But that's what I'm always going for is, can I make you think about something like empathy, which I think we've been lied to about in an interesting way.
And I want to touch on that quickly because I think you've got a really original kind of opinion on that. But I like the way you express that because it definitely comes from your own experience. But I suppose why I wanted to offer that qualification in a way is because someone might listen to this and agree with that, but really because their intention is a seeking to be relevant, the social reinforcement part of things, like you mentioned, rather than highlighting a truly different or original or valuable opinion. And I think a lot of the time maybe all of us do, but we're humans and we fall into that trap because we're led by maybe our ego or whatever the case may be. And so we're on a quest for relevance or fame or fleeting, sort of like, what's the word? Affirmation, rather than because there's an original idea worth sharing.
Yeah, but let's also separate the idea of the relevance of ideas from relevance. Yeah. Right. If I had a monster shit this morning and blocked the toilet, you being a plumber is a lot more important than you being an influencer, right? So the matter at hand is, can you help me unblock my toilet? Not how famous are you as a plumber to the stars, or what would be more important to me is, your closeness, your availability, and your skill. And so relevance comes in. That's why the trades are actually growing in relevance because, you can't fix a light bulb over the internet. And so it's about that. It's
contextual.
yeah, how big is the problem I solve in the world one that people give a shit about? And if the answer is yes, you're in good shape. The second thing is the way that I answer it, is the way that I address that problem that people care about, still the best way to do it? And this is where we're on shaky ground, because there's certainly a lot of jobs and a lot of things where the method of solving for it might be better using various AI tools.
Right. Well, maybe we can go there for a second. I mean, what do you think about? Actually, I want to ask you two different questions, or maybe it's the same one, but just on different levels. The first is like, do you have any opinions on AI, especially when it comes to maybe this particular sector, your work as a public speaker? And secondly, what do you think about the climate of debate and opinion on AI? And the reason I ask that is because I often find that even just the mention of those two little letters, it either kind of like stokes this sort of like sometimes crazy optimism, which sometimes is just unfounded, or there's this sort of like kind of groupthink fear around it. Do you have any sort of thoughts on those two levels, AI?
Yeah, I think we should be fearfully optimistic. Okay, so I think you got the data points correct. So let me tell you what's completely useless. Useless, and there are two. The opposite of fear is your apathy. It's like you give no shits, and the opposite of optimism is pessimism. And I'm so let's say the opposite of fear is maybe gung ho. Right. So if fearful is kind of in the middle. I don't want somebody who's totally gung ho, like let's, go balls to the wall. Because I think, if you look at politics, you've got progressives and conservatives, and progressives' job is to pull this way, and liberal and conservatives' job is to hold them back. What we want at the end of it is that we move forward 1 or 2 steps, not 8 steps, and not no steps. And I think that's the same mindset that we need to have with regards to the embracing of a technology like this. And I think because the technology is potentially so disruptive and so difficult to understand in the short term, we probably need to be taking a 1 step at a time a view on it. Now, I'm very, so I exist, there is a degree of fear, or maybe the unknown. Let's call it, I'm probably outside of fear and on curiosity, because I'm a big fan of history, and there's almost no point in history where we've not gone better. Okay. The second thing is I'm not a preservationist. I'm not so arrogant to believe that we are the perfectly baked, finished form of Homo sapien. Right. Or even humanity, right? So we have evolved through various phases. I was on a show the other day, the universe is 24 hours. Dinosaurs lived for 7 minutes. Human beings have been around for 1 second. Okay, so just to let that sit in, right? Sink in. And so the idea that we are the fully baked human or form of humanity, whereas I believe we're actually relatively early. At best, we're maybe a high school student, graduate, right? So we invented a language which got us from one area to maybe primary school. Then we invented, fire and collaboration and things like this that got us to high school. And now we've got this 32 bits per second communication. And now we're about to evolve to something next. We're about to hit the real time where we have high resolution, super fast. And it's going to be mind-blowing, but it's only people who want to preserve where we're at that are going to be scared. And the thing that's scary is we're probably the only generation in history that will watch such a fundamental step change happen in a single generation, whereas everything else took multiples, thousands of iterations, to get there. Right. Except, the first dude invented fire. Like, whoa. But other than that, this is it. We're at the cusp of something special. So I'm super excited, so much so that we have Too Many Robots. WTF? That's like a company of ours that, and I like I always say, I can never not say the domain because I love the branding elements of it. There's Too Many Robots, or TMR.WTF, which is like, tomorrow, what the fuck? And our CEO is an AI called Tamara Wentworth, which is TMR.WTS. So I'm pretty stoked with the whole narrative.
Oh, wow. Oh.
Yeah. So we built a fun thing there. And that's because I think that people need to get on this train. And most importantly, because Missing Link is so under threat. Missing Link is uh, so many parts of what Missing Link does is under massive amounts of threat. So Missing Link isn't under threat. Human communication, effective persuasive communication is increasing. But our business model is under threat because making slides, making videos, doing all the things that we can do is just simply there's no space for it. Missing Link quoted too many robots. I think it was like 70,000 Rand, which was cost price to make an explainer video for it. Eventually, I was like, no. And I went to the Too Many Robots guy and said, dude, can you do something for me? And under a week, for less than $10, he built one. And this was a guy with zero experience. So at that point, I said to them, your job is to go to war with them. And let's see what survives. What survives stays. What dies goes. And I think that in order to be relevant, if you want to be in the forefront of relevance, you need to go to war with your old business models and your old way of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic bit of general business advice, really, because you've got to kind of burn your ships, right? You've got to kill your darlings when it comes to this, because we are, sort of entering this era of a lot of unknown, but also a lot of kind of re-challenging what perhaps, we've kind of gone, a little bit soft on, or perhaps a bit comfortable with. And so that kind of ties into why I love the title of your book a lot, the relentless part of it, because it's not just about seeking relevance, but there's it seems to me that you're implying a kind of a method of how to do that as well, which is you've got to wake up and really just slay it and be very intentional about how to do that and not give up, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's a big part of the book. The book isn't just the noun, it's the adjective as well, right? It's very important. I think relevance, people have always cared about relevance. You watch, it's amazing. Like, since been working in this, how often the word like triggers up for me. Oh, somebody speaking about relevance. But it's the relentless part that we've not factored in. And in fact, at the beginning of my keynotes, I argue that what I want people to do is to consider making relentless relevance one of their values or behaviors of their company. And I make the suggestion that if they don't, they're in for a problem, because it's the pace that's changed. Relevance used to be a milestone, a marker we would check against on the pathway. Now it's the road that we travel, right? So it's so constant, and things are changing so quickly, and the matters at hand are evolving so much so that we need to almost constantly be asking ourselves, is yesterday's point of view correct? And in fact, one of the things I put forward in my talks and in the new book is this line that we need to give as leaders to our people to say, I have all these ideas. At some point, those ideas may have run their course, but I'll be very invested in them because I created them. I want you to understand you have permission to come to me. And the line you can use is very simple. I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying you may no longer be right. And that framing is huge, because if somebody came to me from my team and said, Rich, I'm not saying you were wrong when you said that this company must go to war with this company, but I think you may no longer be right. And let me explain to you why. And at this point, I have to sit, because what they're saying is, since you made that decision, something of significance has changed. Therefore, we need to relook at the problem to see if it's still the right solution. Yeah. And that used to be 5-10 years. That's why strategy used to make sense. Strategy is an outdated technology that has no place in modern business in the way that it's being utilized. And it's so grossly ineffective. It's horrific. The numbers against strategy are terrible. We would not accept that level of failure at anything else in our business. But, and this is a question. But we need to, as leaders, people are scared because they're going to come to me and say, Alex, you're wrong. You're wrong about what you said last year about such and such. No, wait, hold on. But if I'm trying to say, Alex, when we first chatted just over a year and a half ago, and you told me about what you're doing with Humble Mind and what's going on, I think that was true then, but there's something about it that I think may no longer be correct. And I'd love to explain that to you. That's okay, because I'm just pointing out to you something that I think has changed. By the way, I don't think that. I think your mission is amazing.
I'm really quite taken with what you've just said now, especially around strategy, because I think, most people in business would think that strategy is kind of this unassailable golden covenant that needs to live at the heart, right, of every single business, every single marketing plan, every single promotion, everything you do has to have this kind of little, this little engine inside of it with, and that's the strategy, this kind of baked in recipe about how it's going to work. But what you're saying, it seems, is this, that we need to kind of replace that, at least when it's appropriate, to look at something which is more sort of iterative and collaborative as well. So instead of sort of like packing everything you need for a one-way trip to Mars and hope that you don't die along the way because you got no way else to resupply, you're kind of still going to Mars, but you're sort of you're stopping at intervals and you're sort of checking in and you're making sure, do I have everything you need? Oh, we don't have something. Okay, let's check that out. Let's make sure we can take that on board. Right, bring it on. Let's carry on. Maybe that's a strange sort of extended metaphor, but is that how you're sort of seeing it?
I mean, that's exactly it. It's exactly how I'm seeing it. So when you have to look at the origin of any technology. So what problem were they solving? They had when you go back to Michael Porter and the guys in the 1980s, they had a view of the world, and the view of the world is we're doing things too tactically. Guys, we have a reasonable assumption of destination. We know what the world is going to look like in 5 years. So why are we only thinking 3 months in advance? It doesn't make any sense. Why don't we think 5 minutes ahead? Okay, and then 5 years ahead. And then the second thing is we had a compliant audience that obeyed. So you existed this predictable outcome and command and control leadership style.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you guys what to do on repeat. This is what we're going to do. And if you do that, that machine, that engine will turn and it will get us to where we want to go. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be strategic. I'm saying we should move from strategy to strategic destination. To a point strategically, I believe today we need to be here. The other thing is I think that time frame needs to come a bit narrower. I think a year to 2 years is good. 3 years is a nice stretch. But even then, every year we need to revisit where the carrot is, right? And then so the 3 year can evolve. But the game that we're playing, and it's also why I don't agree with Simon Sinek's, let's be honest, James Carse's finite. In fact, I believe I agree with James Carse's idea of a finite and infinite game. I disagree with Simon Sinek's take that business should be seen as an infinite game. I think the business should be seen in today's day and age as a finite game. That said, I'm not saying that he was wrong when he said it 7 or 8 years ago. I'm saying that he may no longer be right given the world that we exist in today.
So I'm loving this, by the way, because it kind of implies that everything is really iterative, or it should be iterative, because the scale of change is just happening at such a rapid pace now. Time is being compressed. Massive exponential changes that used to happen over 50 years now take place in 18 months. And obviously, we're all kind of starting to really feel that come out of the woodwork now with AI and everything else.
Yeah.
But what would you say then is there a difference between that kind of, old strategic approach where there's a kind of a command, 10 commandments and you got to follow that, and that's the strategy and that's where we're going, and it's going to set sail, don't look back, versus let's say ancient wisdom, or maybe we go back to Cicero, ancient Rome, over 2,000 years ago, where there may be certain principles or certain ways of thinking that we know have stood the test of time for a reason because they are true in and of themselves, and they contain bits of wisdom, or they contain bits of things that can still be applicable. Would you see that as a sort of a challenge to your view, or maybe that's in a different category?
No, I think if anything, it supports the view. So underlying principles are wonderful. But whenever you're dealing with people, because this is the other part of the ripple I spoke about, is this command and control leadership has changed to, self-determined people and units. And in fact, we know when self-determined adults operate in a business with a degree of self-determination, they will do better work, they'll be more fulfilled, and they'll be less burnout. I mean, there is endless amounts of research on this. This is not even contentious anymore. This is what we could get into. It's called SDT, self-determination theory, because, as you know, in science, the word theory almost means that, okay, we're past now this idea of the argument. It's there. And So you've got these people that are working this way, and I always like to come back, and that's why I love the idea of game, is that I want people to be playing. The values are the framework that we set up for people. So I say to them, hey, here's the game that we're playing. Okay, the values, structures, and things that we operate on, the principles, that's the framework that you have freedom to play within. So you have freedom within this framework. And the victory condition is very, very simple, is we have to get to X. So what I like to say to businesses, and when a company will say to me, we want to plan 5 years in advance, I say, okay, well, let's begin with the reasonable, defendable predictions you can make 5 years from now about the world, about your industry. And they're like, well, I say, so why are we planning for that? We need to plan for the period of time where we can make some reasonable assumptions about. Right. And even 3 years is difficult, but I'll give them that. And I say, okay, in order for us to be here by then, what are the short-term steps that we have to do, the actual tactical things that need to be done in order to strategically be here? So yes, we want to win the war, but we can't just defeat Germany. We have to first win, overthrow Napoleon. We've got to win, at Waterloo. And even before that, we've got to take Plassenois away or whatever, so that we can, there's things to be done. Yeah. And so that's what we try to do. So we're playing for Plassenois or whatever, and we know that we've got to get that little farmhouse. That's what we need to do in order to do X. And the rules of engagement are as follows: go. And then you unleash self-determined human beings with a very clear strategic destination and the freedom within a framework of thought and principle to work towards it. And that has to be the only relevant form of strategic execution that would get you results for the world we're living in today. And again, a year from now, you might be able to come back and say to me, Rich, this no longer makes sense. And I'm fully ready for that conversation.
And that's the point of what
that is the
saying.
point.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It kind of reminds me a little bit about agile methodology in a way, right? There's
100%.
reasonable things along the way that we're probably going to change, and we're okay with making those changes or concessions if and when we need to make them, but we're still agreeing on an overall end destination.
And that's it. Yeah. And then all we have to do is every now and then question, is the victory condition? Is the if this then that? Yeah. So the fulfillment of the victory condition will get us to X. Is that X still where we want to go? And every now and then we have to course correct. And it's funny because we borrowed strategy from military. Right? It was a military tool used forever. And only in like the 80s, did it become a business thing. It's amazing because we just kind of assume it was always there. Yeah. But it's funny because if you look at the military now, I read this thing the other day about MacArthur and the General MacArthur, and he said, if his overarching order is, if the order we gave you in the field, if you get to a point in battle that the order that we gave you in the field is no longer the correct order, execute the order that we would have given you had we known this situation.
Right. Yeah.
So we told you this, but Mike Tyson just punched you in the face. And now you exist in that world. What should you have done now? What order would I have given you if I thought you'd already been punched and laying on the floor? Yeah. And that's the order I want you to execute on. Okay, so command and control is out the window. Strategy, this step-by-step, paint-by-numbers planning no longer is relevant.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to have you, and I love the fact that our conversation, just went off. I'm really, really enjoying it. But yeah, I appreciate it, and we'll look out for your new book, absolutely, as well.
Thank you so much, dude. I really, really appreciate that. Everything. Thanks for having me. As always, it's amazing, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.